what to do after a diet, and I am going to share with you a pretty big mistake I've made in the past when doing this, when coming out of a diet, and hopefully that allows you to not make that mistake, and hopefully you don't mind this. Nice messy garage here. Ooh, biceps. Sorry. And the stuff here because it's not too great outside, so we'll be in here today. But what to do after dieting? Well, it's pretty difficult to keep weight off after a diet. And why might this be the case? Why are a lot of people unsuccessful? Well, it's hard to say. There's probably a lot of factors that play into it. There's probably mental factors of no longer being on a diet, so people just kind of go off the rails. And there's probably other factors considering like your hunger levels are probably going to be increasing quite a bit. You probably have certain hormonal levels that are more conducive to putting weight back on pretty rapidly. You could have all those things kind of fighting against you. You could just be generally fatigued from being in a deficit for so long and all that stuff. Your training might not be great anymore. You might not be sleeping as well. All that stuff could be conducive to putting weight back on pretty quickly. So what should you do? You just finish a diet. Well, for one, it kind of depends on what your diet looked like and how lean you got and how fatigued you currently are and stuff like that. So if you were like a competitor or you got really, really lean and you went kind of below your body fat settling range, that point to where you generally feel good, you're training pretty well, you're not super hungry all the time, you're not crazy food focused. If you got to the point to where you are like really, really lean, your number one priority is probably just going to be putting weight back on. And when taking that approach, I would recommend looking up the recovery diet from 3DMJ. That's a good approach to just kind of put weight back on and start actually recovering. But what do you do when you're just kind of doing a more standard diet? Let's say that you diet for 6 to 12 weeks, somewhere in there, maybe even a little bit longer, 6 to 16 weeks, but you're not getting like crazy shredded. What should you do after your fat loss phase so you don't put weight back on super quickly? Well, I think that at this point, it's probably a pretty good idea to run a just strict maintenance phase to where you do maintenance training, kind of a bit of a primer phase, maintenance training, maintenance nutrition, and really try to drop fatigue levels in general. And how long should this kind of maintenance phase be? Well, it's difficult to say, and it depends on how fatigued you are after your diet. But I think that a pretty good rule of thumb is maybe you want that maintenance phase to be maybe a third or even a half to what your actual diet was. So if you dieted for 12 weeks, maybe you want a maintenance phase of anywhere from 4 to 6 weeks to kind of let things level off before you jump into a gaining phase. Or if you diet for longer than that, then maybe it's 6 to 8 weeks you want to maintain, maybe for a couple of mesocycles before you really start pushing the gaining phase. And this should allow you to get back to a good place hormonally, get back to a good place like satiety and hunger wise, get back to a good place regarding your training, your sleep, all that stuff. So then you can actually make your gaining phase the most productive. And this might actually allow you to lower your settling range a little bit by giving yourself a chance to kind of hang out at this body weight. It kind of might actually normalize this body weight before you start putting on a bunch of weight. Now, what if you only diet for like 4 to 6 weeks? Well, should you still do a maintenance phase and stuff like that? I think probably not. I think that you're fine to jump right into a gaining phase if you finish your diet and you're like, I'm not really fatigued. I didn't have to drop my food like that much. I didn't have to run into any sleep issues, stuff like that. If you're not feeling a lot of fatigue, then you might not need much of a maintenance phase after your diet. And it just kind of depends on, hey, how fatigued am I and how long might it take to drop this fatigue before I can actually be productive in a gaining phase. Now, here's something that you shouldn't do. And here's what I did about 4 or 5 years ago. So I used to be about 220 pounds and I cut down to like 160. And right after that, like 2 years of cutting, I went off to college and I stopped tracking my macros altogether. I went off the dining center meal plan. I drank too much alcohol and I just didn't, keep an eye on things too much. And this resulted in me going from 160 to about 178 in the matter of 2 to 3 months. And I think that it was probably pretty close to all fat because I still wasn't like sleeping great. My training was not great at all because I was so fatigued from that like 2-year long diet and things weren't great. And even after that like 2 months, I still wasn't in a good place to go through a gaining phase or do really anything but maintain because I was still pretty fatigued after those 2 months and all I had done is gain a bunch of fat back. And if I could do it again, I would have made sure to at least keep an eye on my calories and just try to maintain in that time for probably several months, probably 3 to 4 months of maintenance after 2 years of dieting. Because what I did after that is I went into another diet after I got up to like 178 and I cut back down to 160 and I was essentially like skinny fat and it was not fun. I was not feeling great about the self at that point. And I feel like when you're like 19 years old, you're like weird about how you feel about yourself anyways. So, it happens. But not a great point. Not a great point. Because I was like identifying as this guy that lifts and this guy that lost all this weight. And now I'm sitting there at like 160. And just like 4 months ago, 160 was like, had some abs, was looking good and stuff. And now 160 does not look very good. And I was just kind of a little stress ball of skinny fatness is what I was. And not good. And at that point, I just kind of told myself, hey, I think that we're at a point to where we have to just kind of eat enough food, focus on training, and maintain for a while. And that's what I did. And after several months, I started looking a little bit better and started finding my groove again. And then I slowly let my weight climb up to the 170s again. I cut back down to like 162. And then I actually looked like what I previous had looked like at 162, not the skinny fat 162. And then once I got back down to that, I was able to go through a nice long gaining phase. And now I'm in what I would like to think, a little bit better position now. Anyways, so the big lessons here, I think so, anyways, are after a fat loss phase, I probably wouldn't change up your diet much. I wouldn't just stop tracking, and I would still keep an eye on macros. Like, you can be a little bit more flexible since you're maintaining maybe, but I think that just going straight like off tracking right after a diet is probably not a good idea because you probably have all these hunger signals working against you. And I think that especially in today's day and age of highly palatable foods and stuff like that, that it would be really easy to overeat and such. So I would keep eating more of the same foods. I would keep a very similar diet. And yeah, after you maintain for a while, you can definitely add some flexibility and then move into a gaining phase and be more and more flexible. But I think right after a diet, I just wouldn't let go of that kind of that objective measurement because your subjective ratings of hunger and stuff like that probably aren't great. And I think that a good rule of thumb is for however long the diet was, you might want to have a maintenance phase of up to a quarter to a half of what that diet was. And that should allow things to normalize a little bit better and put you in a good position to start kind of gaining. And if it was like crazy lean in a contest prep, I would do more so of a more aggressive approach to where you actually put weight back on until you're kind of at the lower end of your settling range. And then on the other side of things, if it's super short, like a mini cut, I probably wouldn't do much of a maintenance phase at all. But next week, I think I want to do a Q&A. I haven't done one of those in a while. Those are fun. I enjoy those. So leave your questions down below. And for the comments below, sometimes I don't get notified if you left me a comment. So if there was ever a time where I didn't get back to your comment, I didn't mean to. I'm sorry. Reach out to me on like Instagram DMs, slide into those DMs or something like that, and I'll get back to you. All right. Leave your questions. Q&A next week. Peace out.